Right now, banks, the federal government, the Federal Reserve, everybody is laser focused on climate change and the risk to assets, to property, and valuation.
Hurricane Katrina was the first time I witnessed climate migration. I didn't know what that was. I just knew people were fleeing for their lives, literally.
I'm not terribly optimistic about the future of the United States when it comes to climate adaptation.
Increasingly extreme rainfall is causing chronic flooding in parts of the U.S., making some neighborhoods uninhabitable.
The Camp Fire is the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in California history.
I would much rather be in paradise, hands down. I would do anything to have my life back.
The rich will adapt. They're already in process of adaptation.
If I didn't have the resources and the capability to make the repairs, I would probably move, because to live in this environment, it would be unacceptable. But I do have the resources and I have the ability to make the correction, so I'm going to do it.
Being a survivor is almost the easy part. Being a refugee, that's a little more difficult. Like a lot more difficult.
No one wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to move because of climate change. On one end, it's people who get forced out. They lose their house. They lose everything. On the other end are people, they have the wealth. They're trying to think about where do they want to build a place for their home, acknowledging that climate change is part of that equation.
We're seeing populations moving more and more into harm's way because insurance and risk transfer really can only go so far.
Climate change has, of course, always been a factor in real estate, but perhaps never been quite this front and center. There will always be people who want to live by the water, who want to live up in the woods. The question is, how much of a cost premium will that become? And at what point can you no longer afford to live where you want to live?
This doesn't look the same at all anymore. My husband's family is from Paradise originally. He was born and raised here. They had a nursery here back in the 30s. And so his property that we lived on as a family was actually his homestead from when he was really young. His aunts and uncles still live on the property. It was 2 stories, so we had a daylight basement. Probably shouldn't tell you this, but the kids used to hit golf balls off the back down low into the canyon. Paradise was a city in the trees, but it's not like your average everyday small town. It's a community. We didn't lock our cars, we didn't lock our doors. If your child left in the middle of the night to go take the garbage out or run down the street, you never worried. Your biggest fear was, is there a bear? I keep saying magical, it's not a great word. It was small town life.
If we didn't have the flooding issues in the house and the flooding issues in the street, this would be my dream house. But we're gonna take care of that. Miami Beach is special because it's so accepting. It's one of the first communities that had equal right protections for gay couples.
We really love this house. We love the neighborhood. We love the city of Miami Beach. Our business is in the city of Miami Beach also. So making a move would be very extreme for us. The ground becomes almost like a sponge and you have the entire water level that rises. So when you have bad rainstorm, all the water is just congregating where you don't want it.
Like in your driveway.
Like in our driveway, in our garage.
And our little bedroom.
And a little bedroom and bathroom.
A lot of the focus on climate disaster and climate change has been on sea level rise and hurricanes, but fire is definitely moving up there very quickly simply because for the last several years, each year we're breaking new records for fire disaster.
We are now in the era of permanent climate disaster, and we better start getting prepared.
The reason you're beginning to see more severity in terms of catastrophes is in a lot of ways behavioral related. It's where we're building, it's where we're moving.
In this country, we can have between 15 and $20 billion loss events every year. In recent years, we've had $300 and $400 billion of losses from extreme weather events in just the past decade. Now, these have huge impacts on local communities.
Fire was something you talked about. It was something you knew about, but to say that anyone was prepared for it, I don't think so. We certainly weren't. The morning of the campfire was just any other day. I mean, there was nothing extraordinary about it. It was a Thursday. I mean, it was just, okay, time to get up, time to shower, time to take the kids to school. So we had a huge window looking out of the kitchen into the canyon because views. And I remember seeing like a weird plume of smoke. And I remember thinking, that doesn't belong there. And then my husband called. He said, it really looks bad. I think you should probably just take the kids and leave. And I said, we do this every single time there's a fire. We freak out, there's no need. It looks pretty far away. I finished packing up lunches for the kids. I got them in the car and my husband called again and I'm like, what do you want from me right now? Like, I am busy. I have a meeting. I'm running late. What do you want? And he's like, I don't know. I'm worried. I'm coming home. I dropped the kids off at school. I forgot my keys to the office and I had to go home. So I pulled down the driveway and I remember like vividly looking left, which doesn't make any sense, but the sun rises on the right. So I remember looking left and I was like, why is the sun over there? That's so weird. And then all of a sudden it hit me. I was like, oh my God, that's not the sun, that's fire. I ripped down the driveway and our back deck was on fire and my husband was coming down the driveway and he's like, the orchard's on fire, everybody has to go, we're gonna get stuck here. Both sides of the road were on fire when we were trying to leave Merrill Road and almost nobody was moving. This was under 15 minutes. Like from the time I got home from dropping the kids off to getting all the crap to trying to get out of Pence. So I had to call my friend to get my daughter. I told the boys to stay where they were because they weren't in the Paradise school system. And we went up. It was just pure chaos. I mean, everyone was trying to get out. My husband at one point wanted to go get Tyler, and I was like, no, you can't leave me. Like, you can't, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want to see it separated. But that's the problem with not having a plan. If you have no meeting point, if you don't know what you're doing, you don't want to get separated. And so my husband's like, all right, let's go down Centerville. I did not know what that meant at the time. I was like, okay, well, wherever you go, I'll follow you. Well, we had friends following us. And with Skyway blocked and Pence blocked, there's no other exit route. That's it. That's what you get. You either go up to Sterling City or you do this dirt road. And it's a back road by every meaning of the name. This is the road. I don't even remember this. Is that crazy? I'm stressed out. It's just my daughter and I in the car. I remember looking up over the canyon and I'm like, oh my God, the fire is going to come over that any second. So I'm telling my daughter, I'm like, it's gonna be fine. Everything's gonna be okay. There's a river down there. Worst case scenario, we'll just drive into the river. Like, it's gonna be okay. And she's like cool as a cucumber for, being 8. We have like the music on and I'm like, looking over and I'm looking over and I'm like, okay, we have like probably 30-40 minutes on this road. So you can kind of see like the canyon wall that I was telling you about. We're like literally inside the canyon right now. Driving through here, it was, I don't know if it was black, but it was really, really dark. And the ash was falling like rain. You see right here. This is where I was like, oh shit. Like it literally was just glowing red. It just felt like it was never ending. At this point, by the time we hit this part of the road, it was like, for lack of a better word, shit got real. And it was just like, okay, we're going, we can't stop, we can't look back, don't pass go, don't collect $200, like just get somewhere where the fire isn't. We hit pavement and all of a sudden CAL FIRE flies behind us and they've stopped traffic on Skyway. They're trying to get us off this road and here comes the fire, just like straight up over this little canyon bank. All in all, it took us, I think it was just under 2 hours. I mean, it's all grown back now. That's kind of cool. But yeah, it was scary.
I grew up in Monroe, Louisiana, which is northeastern Louisiana. It was good music, good food. I played soccer, I did dance, and then everything changed while I was in high school in 2005. That's when Hurricane Katrina hit the shores of Louisiana.
Already thousands of people roam the streets in a mass migration looking for food, water, help.
Katrina could become the costliest single storm in U.S. history.
Our Gulf Coast is getting hit and hit hard. In the meantime, American will pray.
It was devastation. You saw people trying to get out. I and my family, we were trying to get in touch with my uncle, who we knew was on his way up to our house in Monroe, which is 4 hours north of New Orleans from Lake Charles. And we couldn't get in contact with him. We weren't the only ones like this. There was many people like this. We didn't talk to him for over 24 hours. He was stuck on the highway. I mean, there were no proper evacuation routes. So you hear a hurricane's coming and you're like, okay, I'll board up the house. I mean, even in Monroe, we are accustomed to being prepared for the storm after the storm. It's the unsurvivable storm surges, as they're calling it now, which is huge amounts of flooding. It's where trees are being knocked down, power lines being knocked over, and not being able to have power for weeks. I remember kids from New Orleans getting to my high school. In particular, I remember in Mr. Rogers' class, who's my favorite math teacher, taught me calculus 1 and 2, and 2 kids walked in there and it just got silent. I mean, you saw the looks on their faces. It was a boy and a girl, and I don't know if you've ever seen anybody after they've lost everything, but you don't even know what to do in that moment. I mean, as a kid, you have no idea what to do in that moment. And they're just there to learn calculus, you know, like, but all they have is literally the clothes that they're wearing. That's it. They don't have anything else. And those 2 kids, they never moved back to New Orleans. Like so many other people, never went back home. I feel like that young man and young woman have impacted me for the rest of my life. I think back then I felt very helpless, and now I feel thankful because I'm able to advocate for this. I'm able to use that experience for good. Something was really woken up inside of me, and I knew I had to do something. I did not know at that time that this was going to become my life's work. I just knew that I needed to do something. I am a climate scientist, strategist, advocate, and I am currently the executive director of Our Climate, which is a climate change advocacy organization.
I worked in real estate, building buildings and infrastructure, everything from ports to hotels to you name it, all around the world. And what I began to see was the advent of people on the move, very often from hurricanes and forest fires. And what I understood over time is that, yes, there is some latent vulnerability in these communities, and we understand that in historical terms, but also that climate change was beginning to play an increasingly important role in exacerbating these vulnerabilities.
I think the size and the severity of Katrina and how much damage it did really did focus in on those larger hurricanes. If that was a wake-up call, we've been awake since then, because every year we continue to see those Hurricane 5 levels come in more and more frequently, and even talking about perhaps a Hurricane 6, because we need to up the categories because they're simply getting that much stronger. We know that as the earth warms, the atmosphere holds more water, and that simply creates more rainfall.
I'm not a scientist, but I'm logical, and I think that when water levels rise and when you have inundation of just flooding rains and the water has nowhere to go, it just tends to congregate at the lowest point, which unfortunately on our street, our garage seems to be that lowest point, so we're the brunt of all of it.
I would say part of it is connected to climate change. It has to be connected to something. I mean, what else would you blame it on? This is not normal. Sure, fires are normal. The campfire, that wasn't normal. yes, it was caused by PG&E. I believe that. PG&E's admitted to it. There are however many lawsuits about it now. And I know that after the fire, everyone needed somebody to blame, and you're not gonna get a bunch of rural Northern Californians going, climate change. Like, you're not going to hear that. So naturally, it was easy to blame PG&E, and I blame PG&E too. It was faulty equipment. But the equipment would not have caused the fire it caused if it wasn't for circumstances.
Especially with fires in California, you are seeing a migration out of certain areas. But for the coast, I mean, anyone who studies this will tell you people like to live by the water. And they see the hurricanes come in, they see the water rising, and they still want to live by the water. It's just how they are.
Driveway's flooded. It's only been raining for a few minutes, and the driveway's already starting to flood. So it won't take long now. It's almost like when you draw, you mark your height as a kid. These are like flood levels that we've had in the house. This was yesterday. This was once before. This is once before. I think this was the highest we've had right here. This is when my car was underwater, this flood. If I didn't have the resources and the capability to make the repairs, I would probably move, because to live in these conditions in this environment, it would be unacceptable. But I do have the resources and I have the ability to make the correction, so I'm going to do it, because it's paradise living here to me, in my opinion. We put in a sump pump in this location to try to eliminate the flooding. It wasn't really that successful, because basically the sump pump, it just has a pipe and it just shoots the water out to the street. Well, you know, when the street is flooded, there's really nowhere for the water to go. It proved itself to be ineffective. But what it does show you here is where the sea level water is. So you can see we're right at sea level. If we were at high tide, the water would be backed up into the garage, just from this point right here. We started noticing it like 10 years ago, because it was never that high when we bought the house. It's progressively gotten higher and gotten worse. If you want to talk climate change and sea level rise, there's pure evidence of it right there. Now you can see, if you walk in here, you can see some past evidence of flooding that we've had. Like when it's a really strong storm, it will actually reach above this door and flood this room as well too. So that's how bad it gets. Now we've had about 3 feet of water, so you can imagine the amount of water that gets into this area. So it's pretty substantial. So every time we have a flood, you always have to remove the drywall, remove the insulation, have machines come in here and blow dry. They have to stay in here for at least 6 days to make sure everything is dry, so you don't get mildew, because of course that causes respiratory problems. And now if you look here, you can see, just from the little rain that we've had, the yard is already flooded. Just from that little amount of rain we have. It doesn't take a whole lot of rain to flood. And it's just an ongoing situation. So that's why we have to get this done. The renovation cost, if I had put a figure on it, is probably going to be about $250,000 when it's said and done. We did apply for FEMA to see if they would assist, but FEMA turned us down. Insurance is not paying for any of it. This is all out-of-pocket expenses for us, which, you know, it's unfortunate, but it is what it is, and we have to do it. So we have no choice. What I have here is the existing overplan of our house, and this is facing north, and this is our garage. This is the area that's always flooding. This causes most of the problems here. We're going to build on to the existing floor plan of our house, but go up substantially. We're raising the driveway up by 3 feet, and we're raising up the bedroom and guest bath by 4 feet. So there's going to be quite a big difference. The main objective is to eliminate all the flooding that we've been experiencing over the last, 15 years or so.
How valuable is your house now? If you were to sell it today, what would it go for on the market, do you think?
I'd say the value is about $1.8 million. I think that once we do the renovations to the property, it's going to be over $2 million, because that's what they're selling for, properties, once it's redone.
We anticipate a rapid decline in valuation, in the sense that really only the wealthy can afford to live, for instance, in high-risk coastal areas, because everybody else can't insure it and won't be able to get a mortgage. This is something like musical chairs, where the last person standing is the person who may lose all of their equity and their value in their home.
If you understand that 90% of insurance losses are related to natural catastrophes, the amount of loss costs have increased 700% since the 80s. So right then and there, you understand that climate risk is changing and the industry has been paying close attention to it. Fire is a catastrophe that is covered in a traditional homeowners insurance policy. In California in particular, they have what they call the FAIR plan, and that's an insurer of last resort that they can go to as well. So there are still options for Californians in terms of insurance outside of just the traditional market. Cancellations don't happen very often, but when they do, it's usually because of lack of payment or misrepresentation.
I think it was really sticky for us personally because we were stuck in between. FEMA looked at us like we had insurance because we had an insurance policy, but we didn't get paid. It took us almost 8 months to get a final denial letter. They actually refunded us our policy amount, and that was it.
We are seeing quite a bit of devastation, as we know, from wildfires right now. I think it's more important than looking at a national fire insurance program is actually beginning to look at how we're building, where we're building, what we're doing with our forests, and making ourselves more resilient.
The next morning, a lady named Michelle, that I don't even know, called me and said, "We have a lake house, it's sitting there empty. Why don't you just go there until you can go home?" I tried to think about what would I have done. We would not have been fortunate enough to get a hotel room. I think we probably would have ended up getting a trailer and trying to live back at the property like so many people have done.
Most everyone who lives in particularly high-risk coastal areas, but also areas at risk from forest fires, how do they get out? When do they get out? How do they time this?
We never wanted to stay in Chico. That was never the plan. From the moment we found out the house was gone, we were like, this is what we're doing. We're gonna rebuild. We're gonna be the first house done. Like, we were just so motivated. Obviously at this point it had only been a month, but we had enough wherewithal to know we wanted to rebuild where his parents built. Like, it meant something special to him. And so we started looking into finance options because we were not going to take no for an answer. That was more me than my husband. Our plans got approved. At this point, building costs were just starting to go up. I remember sitting at this table that wasn't ours at this rental, and he looked at me and he said, "Even if we get a loan, we're gonna be underwater on this house for the rest of our lives." And I think that was when it hit me. I was like, what are we gonna do? And all of the kids, without skipping a beat, said, let's just stay in Chico.
The fires raging around the globe right now, just one visible example of the devastation brought on by climate change. In California, destruction and loss everywhere the Dixie Fire has touched. It's now the second largest wildfire in California history, the area just about 10 miles outside the town of Paradise. The town destroyed by that camp fire 3 years ago.
I sold this property up here. It was a property that made it.
And so that's after the fire.
Yeah, that's after the fire. This is going to be part of everyday life. We've had 2 major fires in 2 years. There's dangers anywhere you go. The danger here is fire. The danger in New York might be different. The danger in Florida might be hurricanes. If you're going to live in an area that has real danger, you have to be willing to not only know what you can do to prevent that on your own, but how to escape it. Because it's not a matter of if it happens, it's a matter of when it happens. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to be uncomfortable.
When you think about purchasing a home, oftentimes you don't think about risk. But there are things that come into play when you're purchasing a home that can change your behavior. So in our personal example, when we were looking for a home, we have small children. My wife said, I don't want us to live in an area that has a school rating with an 8 or below. We changed our behavior. We only looked in those areas.
So now actually on Realtor.com, there's a flood score that was put there by First Street. There was a lot of arguing over this in the beginning because do we want that to be put on our homes? Do we want to see that there's a risk so that perhaps a buyer who's looking at buying my house sees that I have a high flood score? Is that going to send them away and then therefore lower the value of my house? But Realtor.com thought it was important enough to list that flood score. So yes, banks are laser focused on climate risk because it's their risk, because they're the ones who are going to be left holding the bag if I default on my mortgage.
I think what we've learned or are learning about the realty community is it's not just about selling one house, it's about selling a lifetime of homes. And so helping them manage risks better is a great way for them to build trust and confidence with their consumers. Can it negatively impact the seller? Absolutely. But these are just things that we have to encounter. Properties change over time, and this is going to happen more and more as we're seeing changes in our climate.
Blue lining is a phenomenon where banks and investors are beginning to draw lines of risk. They're beginning to think about where to invest and where to disinvest more formally. And part of the challenge is how accurate that science is and what are the implications and impacts for communities inside and outside of the lines.
People are having a double whammy, The red-lined communities that are still being impacted are now going to be impacted by this blue lining going on. And so when are we going to hold the banks accountable to this? Things tend to happen when a certain race of certain socioeconomic status is impacted. And that's when you see immediate change on the go. And I think that what is very important right now is not just for climate migrants to be vocal and to demand action and proactive planning, but it's also for people who have never been impacted by climate migration.
It is a beautiful day for us to fight for jobs and justice and climate action.
People want action. The original infrastructure bill was including all of these various elements, and now we're not seeing it. So people aren't going to be quiet. And when people aren't quiet, then that's when things actually get done. The National Flood Insurance is now wanting to provide payouts for people getting away from at-risk climate areas. But that's going to get expensive. How many people have flood insurance? 40% of the world's population lives on a coast. Break that down to the United States, you have a lot of people who live near a body of water. And I think that actually is going to be a big topic on the Hill within the next year, just because that's going to be in, from appropriations to the budget, how much are we feeding into the National Flood Insurance?
A flood insurance policy is actually separate from your traditional homeowner's policy. So a customer has to understand where they live. If they're in a flood-prone area, then they will need to get an additional flood insurance policy. Now, this policy is oftentimes offered by the government, the National Flood Insurance Program. The National Flood Insurance Program was set up by the federal government because at the time, insurers simply couldn't model the risk or price it.
You can really look at the program in about 3 sections. The first 10 years, we're about 52 years old. First 10 or so years was the program getting up to speed, getting communities to participate, starting to get homeowners and small business owners to understand that insurance was available through the government. Then we have about a 20-year period where it was a relatively mild period. And then you have the last 20 years where we've had a number of significant events, catastrophic events for a catastrophic disaster program, with Katrina being about a $17.5 billion event. So the program was never designed to necessarily bring in all the money needed to pay for all of the programs, whether that's insurance claims, the grant program, the mapping program, or the floodplain management program. And so the program's actually functioning and operating as it was designed. The design needs to be updated.
The FEMA flood maps are completely out of date, and FEMA would admit that. They have to us already. They're actually redoing all the flood maps. They're also heavily politicized because a lot of the reporting for flooding comes from local jurisdictions. It comes from states, it comes from municipalities, it comes from small cities, small towns. Maybe a small town doesn't want to have to pay flood insurance, so maybe they're not going to report that they've seen increased flooding because they know that that's going to create an issue for homeowners that they're going to have to pay for FEMA flood insurance premiums.
Risk rating 2.0 is something that recently the National Flood Insurance Program put out really to modernize and address how insurance ratings are. What we've seen is there are disparities in the program in that if you have a large home on the coast, you're paying really at the same rate as somebody that has a small house in a community that doesn't have as much income. So the program is attempting to address the disparities. However, I think as long as you have a primarily government-driven flood program, it's going to be difficult to get it to a place where people are insured as much as they should be.
Without the National Flood Insurance Program, there would have been far more development in the high-risk area. Has the program stopped any unwise development? Of course not. But our floodplain management regulations do save $100 million in average year in losses avoided because of the program being in place.
It's going to be up to the states, it's going to be up to the federal government how much they're going to do before the disaster happens, because we talk so much about paying to repair the disasters, but if you do it beforehand, you avert the disasters. Miami, the city, has millions and millions of dollars that it's using right now to try to use pumps and extra things to help the city survive longer term. But again, taxpayers actually want to foot that bill because they know it's going to help their property values in the long run.
I live in a home, but you still have to maintain your home. You have to maintain your environment around your home. And maintaining your environment means maintaining your streets, maintaining your sidewalks, maintaining any issues that affect your home. And this is affecting my home. What's happened over the decades, people, including myself, have, put landscaping, built up soil, and just done crazy stuff to their swales, and it's prevented water from collecting there. What I did, which I should not have done, is I planted these palm trees. So what the city is going to come do is they're coming and they're removing all these palm trees on both sides, and they're going to dig down and create what it should have been from the very beginning. Okay, so they're going to come down and they're going to put in drainage pipes. It's going to go from Alton Road all the way west down 59th Street to Biscayne Bay. This is a pilot program that's being sponsored and paid for by the city of Miami Beach to the tune of $850,000, thank you very much. What we're doing in our bioswale is just a temporary fix because our bioswale is only going to eliminate maybe a couple of inches of water at best. It's basically a Band-Aid for a larger problem.
I think what we have to rethink in this country is our calculations for where to invest and where to disinvest. Historically, we've used cost-benefit analysis to net out benefits, and guess what? That's helped wealthy people, it's helped homeowners, and it's excluded vast classes of people in this country. So I think we need to think about what are the economic benefits, of course, but what are the environmental benefits? What are the social benefits? And we need to think about a triple bottom line as we begin to prioritize where we put our limited resources in protecting and adapting America's coastlines.
I might do chips instead of a tortilla.
In the last 4 years, maybe even longer in California, have been the hottest damn years I've ever experienced before.
We would see instances of fire, but nobody, I don't think anybody thought that it was possible for the whole town to burn down. Certainly not in a day.
They don't want you to cut trees down, and you have 90-year-old residents. They're not gonna get out and rake 4 feet of pine needles. Anybody that lives in the trees knows that fire is a real possibility. Yeah. We all knew it.
After the fire, I think people were more accepting, but people were also upset because we were completely overwhelming their infrastructure.
You couldn't go into a store or pass a fence or an overpass or go somewhere where you had to show your ID, and people were like, you could see that look on your, like, oh, Paradise address.
We took what was an already expanding area and we filled it with thousands of people. So I think that there was a lot of anger and uncertainty from even people who lived here.
How do you go back to somewhere that you've known that you know is never going to be the same?
Half of our street burned and the other half didn't. All of our neighbors were gone. I didn't want to bring them back up there and have them have to deal with that every day. It just seemed like too much, like they'd already, their little brains had been through enough.
My kids are forever changed because of this. Our oldest Hunter picking a college, and he is staying away from certain areas because of natural disasters. That's crazy to me. So I think it definitely has affected all 3 of my kids. My daughter, in terms of, the world that she's growing up in, I wanted her to grow up in a town that had stuff, but also in a small enough town that she knew everyone. And that was ripped from her.
I wouldn't say I have a lot of friends at CRT. There are people I'd like to be friends with, but I feel like I have to be there a little more to start fitting in more.
There's winners and losers, but right now we're kicking the can. We're not having these difficult conversations because no politician wants to stand up and say, you know what, community, it's not going to be possible for, or desirable, or even really technically capable of having you live in place in where you live now. The long-term implications are that you have less wealth and less accrual of capital in these communities. And what does that really mean? That means small businesses get hit hard, employers get hit hard, supply chains. And it really can reverberate in terms of long-term accrual of wealth in these communities, not just as they recover, but their capacity to thrive going forward.
There was recently a study done by Harvard which showed that they expect the home values of homes that are on higher ground in Miami specifically to rise much more quickly than those on the waterfront. Now you would think waterfront homes, those are the most expensive. Everyone wants to live by the water, but they predict that as sea level rise starts to create more and more flooding, you have more and more disasters, that people will start to move those expensive homes to higher ground and therefore inflate values. And in fact, some investors are now buying that higher ground land at cheaper prices because they expect home values there to rise.
I guess if I wanted to play a victim, I could. If I wanted to feel sorry for myself that I've had so many flood claims, I guess that's just the cost of living in Florida, living on Miami Beach. You pick and choose. If I wanted to live in Kansas where it was so dry, I could say I'm a victim of a dry climate, you know, and bad skin because it's so dry, you know, but you're a victim of where you live. You know, you choose your atmosphere. I mean, people think South Florida's gonna be underwater in 20 years, sell your property and do this and do that. I don't buy into that scenario. But, you know, 50 years down the road, maybe, we'll see, I don't know. I'm not selling my home to do it. Climate change certainly does play a part of it. I can't contribute all of our flooding to climate change because it's also part of just regular tidal seasonings. If you live in South Florida, you can't escape the flooding. It's gonna be all of Florida. So that's reality.
And the East Coast, New York.
We can't just blow it off and say, you know, it's not our problem, because it is our problem now, and we need to address it now and not just, you know, leave it for the next generations because they'll have to deal with it.
You are in the meeting now.
I'm Jasmine Sanders, Executive Director of Our Climate. She, her pronouns here, calling from Washington, D.C. I'll pass it to you.
Hi, Kristen Hite from Oxfam America, and she, her pronouns as well. Thank you. Hi, Juden Jones.
These are the types of conversations that are more so happening within coalition meetings.
The term refugee has legal significance, and it's for people who are protected from forced return in contexts where they're facing political prosecution. It's a very narrow definition. Thank you, United Nations. But like you said, there's also the internal displacement piece. And so for that reason, at Oxfam at least, we've really been trying to figure out, how do we talk about a situation like this? And you mentioned Hurricane Katrina earlier. I was displaced by Hurricane Katrina, but am I a climate refugee? That's a strange concept for me in my head.
There were over 1 million people who were displaced by Katrina. We have to talk. I did not realize that you were displaced from Katrina, and I'm from Louisiana. So I just think it's a bigger issue that we are not used to. So how do we make sure that we humanize the issue and make it a greater point for people?
What is the financing available to support people who have been climate displaced? We've seen in Copenhagen in 2009 this commitment to raise $100 billion a year.
It's really not about you or me or even governments telling people or communities what to do, right? It's about giving them the agency and the information and the choices to understand what's going on. And then it's about funding that. So one thing that we as Oxfam are asking for, and a lot of others are, is a new finance facility or solidarity fund to be able to address loss and damage. It can't just be about adaptation anymore.
Thank you, everyone. This was a beautiful conversation. All right. Bye, Lindsay.
All right, take care. Goodbye.
Right now, the vast majority of the responsibility, whether it's infrastructure services or handling and working with local communities, is really the responsibility of state and local governments, and they have no resources to fundamentally draw upon.
We are going to have a significant amount of funding from the government to go towards the likes of infrastructure. I think it's going to be critical that we also make sure that that infrastructure is tied to being resilient.
What's going to be really interesting going forward is to see how insurance companies change their valuations on properties, how the federal government changes how it backs homeowners and backs real estate companies, et cetera. If they start raising interest rates on borrowers who live in much more climate dangerous areas, then you're going to start to see migration much more. It just comes down to cost.
I feel a sense of excitement because we've hired a contractor, an engineer, and we worked our butts off. We really did. We worked our butts off the last few years to save the money to be able to do the construction. We didn't have to take out a mortgage, which is also a huge accomplishment for us because we didn't want to borrow money to do these improvements. We're of the age now that we don't want to have to take out a mortgage.
When we first started having an issue, we started thinking about what would it cost to raise the house or certain areas, and it was exorbitant. It was crazy expensive. Now we've been talking to contractors and they've let us know that they have all sorts of different systems. So I am thinking that in 20, 30 years, that maybe it's much more cost effective and eventually they'll just have to raise up all the homes and the entire elevation of the city gets raised by 2 feet to kind of stay on top of rising seas.
We love Miami Beach. We love our home. I mean, we love the flavor, the bohemian atmosphere of Miami Beach. I mean, I wouldn't love Miami Beach if it was all torn down and redone and everything was on stilt homes. That's a new environment of Miami Beach. I don't know if I would love that.
Communities want to develop. It's good for their economy. But are they asking themselves, are we developing this in a place where it will be resilient in 50 or 100 years? It oftentimes means that sometimes we're not providing the insurance in the right way, and sometimes we may be incentivizing people to build these beautiful homes on a barrier island and pay an artificially low insurance rate.
Now the bigger question is, if every house around you is destroyed and you're the only one left standing, how valuable really is that house if there's no community?
I think if we as a community would have benefited from anything from the government, it would be some sort of survival plan. I don't want to call it a handbook because that's like saying there's a handbook for parenting. There's no such thing. There's an education piece missing, I think. It's part of why I started the nonprofit, and we help people develop go bags, 5-minute plans. We help them stay alert with their surroundings, get them in touch with neighbors so that if there is an evacuation, they have some sort of a game plan in place. Being a doer and having an outlet to be useful is the best form of therapy that there is.
Insurance has been around for 300 years. Changes have been happening, disruption's been happening all over the place, and the insurance industry addresses it. You really don't understand the risks all the time when you're purchasing the home. Sometimes you might be provided a flood map, and oftentimes these flood maps are out of date by the time you get them. So it is important to better understand it. In fact, at III, we've established a hub, resilience.iii.org, and right now there's a tool that you can go on and type in every property in the United States, and you can understand up to 30 variables of risk. We think those types of education programs of just instilling risk and helping people understand how to manage it are going to be very important in the future.
We need to, through democracy, determine about what we want to protect and what we want to let it go. The other thing we can do is operate as smart consumers, avail ourselves of information, understand what our communities are doing to invest in assessments of climate change, help participate in those assessments to understand where vulnerabilities are and are not so that we can guide the allocation of resources in the right way that equitably and fairly and efficiently help everybody.
This conversation is just barely touching the surface on the federal level. That's the frustrating part, because at this point, it's like how many people need to be affected by internal displacement, aka how many people need to be affected by climate migration in the United States for this to be a priority issue. Up to now, climatic disasters were only dealt with by FEMA, and now you're starting to see where Homeland Security is getting involved. Really right now, it's about implementing action. People often want to know, well, what can I do as an individual? Write, tweet, call your elected officials. If they don't hear from their constituents about this issue, then we can't move things. But imagine what we can do if we actually have a whole movement of people walking down Pennsylvania Avenue and standing in front of that White House talking about climate migration. People who were affected by the wildfires, people affected from coast to coast by hurricanes, people affected by flooding for decades. This is what we need. We're at a critical time here. But we have opportunity right now to actually utilize our resources and to hold people accountable for what they need to do.